Hello, Embers. Welcome back to Ember Exchange. I'm Dylan.
I'm Jill.
I'm Heidi.
And I'm Nick.
This is part 3 of a 3-part series, and I say that with great confidence because I will not allow this to get to the end of this and say, oh no, we've run out of time, there's a part 4. That will not be happening. This is part 3 of a 3-part series called Egalementariarchy. And so we'll review a little bit about what is even that, and we're very glad that you're here for the conversation. So why don't we stoke some conversation? Well, here we are in part 3. This is going to be a lot more laid back, I think, is how we've kind of described this. Because the first episode was, I don't know if rigorous is the right word. It was pretty rigorous, though. Like, we took 3 terms. We took wow, I'm going to say the wrong thing because I made that dumb amalgamation of the 3 words. Can't even say the original ones. Egalitarianism, Complementarianism, and patriarchy, biblical patriarchy, and we discussed what those were in their definitions, a little bit of who holds them, and then a few notes on some of the biblical support that gets used for each position. If you want to understand more fully what we mean when we say those words, go back and listen to part 1. We're not going to rehash the definitions in great detail here. And then in part 2, we spend a lot of time just looking in the Bible itself to see, not necessarily from one lens or another, how do you read into what Scripture is saying, but what does Scripture have to say for itself, and then comparing that to some of the ideas that were expressed in each of the 3 positions. And that one went longer than expected because Heidi led us on a wonderful and very interesting dive into the world of Deborah. So I'm very glad that we did that. Thank you, Heidi.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
You're all probably sick of hearing my voice at this point.
No,
but it's
not
okay.
at all. But that didn't leave us enough time to do what I do want to do in this episode, which
Yes.
is more of the philosophical conversations, meanderings, so to speak. Just some general questions. So we can use Scripture if it is relevant, but we're not going to be diving very deep like we did in the last one. And we're kind of just going to, think about some thoughts about some things. I think the first question that we should probably start with, or the first observation is, so we've discussed these 3 positions, and some of them have a very specific prescription for how you live, I suppose. So I'm thinking specifically biblical patriarchy, right? If you ascribe to that, which we certainly seem to speak highly of in the past 2 episodes, in that circumstance, you would not have a wife who is working outside the home. And then you might look at us and say, that's not what we do. Jill has a job. We've talked about that before. Heidi's got a job. So how do we make of that? How do we look at biblical patriarchy and say, yes, this seems to be good, and then not necessarily live in that way? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Are we like total hypocrites? And this is some self-reflection, right, that we get to look at ourselves and say, are we missing the point here by saying one thing and then not living in a certain way? What do you guys think?
Some might say that we are. I would say talk to us in 10 years because this is a journey.
That's a really good observation. So dive into that a little bit. What do you mean by journey?
Well, Christianity in and of itself starts from a seed and grows into a tree. And over time, we grow in our convictions and our understanding of what the Bible actually says. And through prayer and petition, we're able to better understand the will of God. And so over time, we have to adjust our real life to what our convictions are. And that isn't always something that can happen overnight, especially with large things like income, who's working, who's not working, and how you operate within your home. I would say a lot of those transitions, just like starting a new job, you can't expect someone to know that everything the first day. It can take 6 months to a year to actually fully onboard someone. It can take 6 months to a year or even 5 years to onboard your convictions. But that doesn't mean that you can just have convictions and stay stagnant.
Sure.
So I think we can talk a little bit more amongst ourselves, and hopefully the Embers are talking amongst themselves just about what we're actually doing to move towards our convictions, because of the things that we're talking about today are not salvific issues.
Sometimes we do, but a lot of the things we talk about are borderline towards non-salvific.
Right. It doesn't mean they're not important, and
Certainly.
it doesn't mean that we shouldn't act, but it is not a matter of going to heaven or hell. And so, are we hypocritical in this moment today? Possibly. But I think that we can talk amongst ourselves on how we're moving towards accurately living out biblical patriarchy.
Sure.
I think in this continued conversation too, that part of it is the Embers, have gotten to see us like actively work through some of those things.
Oh, yeah. That's
So
a really good point.
in that, I would say, like, no, we're not being hypocritical. We're gaining a better understanding of where those convictions are coming from and where we actually sit on them.
And the podcast platform and social media in general is a snippet of our lives, and there's oftentimes things going on in the background and in the other 43 hours or 23 hours in a day you don't get to see of us. So.
Yeah. Well, and it's more than that because we release, about an hour every 2 weeks.
Right.
So there's a lot that the Embers aren't seeing.
Yeah.
Right.
I think what you're raising is a very interesting point, though. And I think it's one of the things that makes our podcast unique. And everyone thinks their podcast is unique.
Right.
So maybe unique is a strong word. One of a kind is hard to come by these days. But oftentimes you'll listen to philosophical or theological, political podcasts, and the person is telling you how to think. Because they've got it figured out already. And so they're taking the role of a teacher and they're teaching you what they already know and presumably are already living. That's not always the case, but there's an implication that this is how they live their life, and so you should do that too. We do a little bit of that observationally, but most of the time when it's an instructional component, we're instructing ourselves. And if you even go back, I think a lot of the ideas and the convictions that we have now might not even be represented, or you might see a shift in the way that we talk about certain issues from the first time. So I'm thinking back to our very first episode, Girl Bosses and Guns. I think we got a comment on the video asking if we were complementarians. And that was the first I'd ever heard that word.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
I
wow.
hadn't heard complementarianism as a thing. I knew that there was, like the principle of men and women being the same versus not the same, and we believe they're not the same, but I had never captured it that way. And it sounds like maybe you had more experience with that than I did. But I saw that comment, and I was like, oh, yeah, I guess kind of that sounds sort of like what we are. And here we are now really diving into what that actually means. And so there's a transformative piece. There's a journey, just like you're saying. So, yeah, I don't know. People are here working through it with us, hopefully, as well. And they're thinking things as we think through things. But
And the Embers get to hopefully have similar conversations in your own circles. And you don't have to have arrived in order to have these conversations. This is how you get to the convictions and work through it.
I think a point that you were saying too was not salvific, but convicted of. And so another piece to that I think we've had conversations just in our own household on in the not 1 hour that the Embers are listening to us every other week. And that is, it's kind of a sliding scale. There's like bad, good, better, best. And that can even be split a little bit. So let's say, right, there's good and bad as in sinful and evil, or what we are called to as in potentially salvific. But then there's also just the ideal, or what's better and best. And I think as we've worked through this, we've come to the conclusion that Christian patriarchy is the ideal. It is what is described in the Bible. It's what we've been convicted of. But if we aren't there yet, that doesn't inherently mean that we are. It is sinful.
which extends to the Embers listening, right?
Correct.
You're listening to this and you're like, boy, I'm a woman listening and I still have a job. And they're saying this biblical patriarchy thing is good. Am I sinning by having a job? I don't think, I want to be careful and not say, no, you're totally fine. Because there are people who would say, oh, it's totally fine. If somebody is convicted of a thing and they are actively rebelling against that conviction, I think that could be described as sinful. But understanding the journey, right, is what you're describing. That if you're moving towards what is best, right, that's what the process of being sanctified is, right? Mm-hmm. Personally, as well as in your relationships. If you're moving towards that end, not being there yet, I don't think is something that you should be ashamed of.
There's wisdom in these larger things in life. It would be unwise, in my opinion, to just up and quit your job one day because you woke up with a conviction of biblical patriarchy, especially if you're the breadwinner in your home as a woman. You need to steward your home well and figure out how to work your convictions into that.
Sure, yeah. Mm-hmm. One thing that this raises in my mind, or kind of reminds me of, are you guys familiar with the concept of quote-unquote Christian freedom? So this is what Paul describes of eating the meat sacrificed to idols. And everything is permissible and not everything is beneficial. And so that being another way, or maybe to take a verse out of context, because that's all we're allowed to do today, is to say, if it is permissible for a wife to hold a job outside the home, but not beneficial, that could be that distinction between you're not like actively sinning, but there is something better to work towards. It'd be a way to couch that in some Paul words, potentially. Related to this, is it possible, this is maybe going more a political direction with this, is it possible to live according to true biblical patriarchy in our modern culture with inflation the way it is and the price of homes and groceries and all of those things? What do you guys think?
Impossible? No.
No, I was going to say, I think it's proven that some people do it and do it well. And it requires, various sacrifices in different ways, potentially, however that looks in your family. I think that the way that things have been set up, though, it does make it very difficult. Or at least very difficult, maybe just from the onset, right? Like you said, talk to us in 10 years and maybe we are in a completely different setup. But our society, not to use that as an excuse, but it has set it up so that women stay single potentially until they're 30. Some, many longer, sometimes always, right? And singleness is also a blessing. But if you're talking about Christian patriarchy, someone that's single in our society until they are 30 years old, unless they're living at home, how are you going to pay rent and eat food?
Yeah, also you don't want to be in your parents' home sitting around doing
until you're 30.
Nothing.
Like as a woman, your maximal productive years have sailed past you while you sat in your parents' basement. We make fun of dudes who live with their parents. Go out and make something of yourself.
Right.
But also for a woman that's doing that, she should be looking for a husband to start caring and building a home.
Right.
Right. But if she's going to, at least currently, pay rent and eat food, then she's probably going to have to find an occupation. There's not another way around it. And so now when she comes to finding potentially that person in her life, well, she already has a job, and hopefully he does as well. And again, in some situations, maybe it could be even unwise to just, up and we're done. Like, cut it off. I'm getting married, so that's it. Maybe yes, maybe no.
Well, I was single a year ago. What I thought at the time was I was doing the right thing. I had a career. I have a career. Doing well for myself, looking for a husband at the same time. I really don't think there's anything wrong with that, but we do get to, as women, understand our role and possibly think of how we approach our careers so that we don't end up having this dream of becoming a lawyer and working for the rest of our lives and being the main breadwinner and then wake up one day and we're 30, which just happens to many, many women, And they're like, shoot, I wanted to get married and have a kid, and I spent 80 hours a week at the office, which didn't give me the capacity to build my life in that way. And then all of a sudden you have only a couple years when you were 20, you had plenty of time to find a good man. So
there is a difference between making the career the end goal and recognizing early on what that is. And I think that would probably be one of the biggest societal lies that exists, right? Men and women are equal. You get the egalitarian approach is men and women are equal. They can do all of the same things. So why don't they go and do all of the same things? But then when they do, it definitely makes it a lot harder as well for a woman that is 30 to that ends up being a greater sacrifice when you're 30. For the last 10 years since you graduated to become a lawyer, to become a whatever, she is going to probably have a more difficult time leaving that job than a 22-year-old that just graduated college and got their first job and maybe worked for a year.
Right.
Arguably, I'd say that one of those is more difficult to let go of than the other.
And it is hard to see even friends of mine who are in their 30s and have been praying for a husband for 15 years. And that's what their heart desires, and they've been actively looking for one. So we certainly aren't saying that they're doing anything wrong. But over time, convictions change, and you get to adjust your life. So leaving space for that adjustment is good.
Yeah.
How much of a role do you think the Christian community, and even more narrowly focused, the familial support and encouragement, plays a role in setting people up for success in this area? I'm thinking like parents. So if your parents are encouraging you to think in this way, because they, like, for example, in the future when we've got a family, I'm going to hopefully be encouraging my sons to be orienting their life and their mindset towards the next generation that comes after them, because that's what I'm trying to do for them, and then teach them to do the same, and so on. And that's how it carries on. Try to teach my daughters that you have a glorious and beautiful role that God has given you. I want to position you optimally, and you will learn from your mom what it means to be a wonderful woman of God caring for a home, because there are skills that you'll need for that. A lot of that success in that area, I feel like, could be potentially enhanced by having parents, and not just parents, but also a believing community around you that is also thinking the same way. And maybe that's, you mentioned that there are some people that you know that have been praying and hoping and watching for the opportunity to live out a life and step into that, but sometimes the opportunities just aren't there. And I don't, like, you wouldn't say that that's necessarily their fault.
Right, not at all.
Could there be some responsibility to be borne by modern cultural Christianity that doesn't value that anymore, potentially? What do you guys think?
Yeah, that's a hard one, because my mom worked through the time that I was a kid. I mean, she just retired, so she worked for 40 years. But at least growing up, and even now, I think that she also successfully showed us how to manage a home well. So she was able to do both. And so you kind of look at that and be like, well, if you can do both, what's wrong with that? Now, we also have family friends, and like Heidi said, many female friends that are single and have desired and prayed for that for a lot of their lives. They were brought up by moms that stayed home or maybe worked and managed the home well. So they were trained up in that way. And I don't know if it's to the detriment. Like, I don't know, right? Like, God will put the right people in the right place at the right time, hopefully. But by staying in a smaller community where they are, that community has brought a lot of blessings to their life. Has it also potentially made some of the options like fewer?
Yeah.
Right? Like, after you're 20 and you've kind of seen the pool, going somewhere else would that have led to opportunities that maybe they didn't have? I don't know.
You're saying that by building this smaller community that has this shared set of ideals, you inherently limit your options, and so leaving that community to find what you're looking for, be that a career or a family to build, is inevitable because you just don't have enough options in the space that you're living in.
Yes. I mean, yes and no. I guess I'm saying that there can be proof on both sides that it's possible to do. Not what we would say is the ideal, but it seems like I grew up in a small Christian community. My mom did work, though, and so she wouldn't have lived out Christian patriarchy to its fullest.
Mm-hmm.
However, I wouldn't fault her in saying she didn't manage her home well and raise her children and do all of those things. And then on the flip side of that, yes, the smaller community raised with those ideals and people that I do know potentially did limit their options due to that. Maybe not, I'm not sure. Because, yes, politically, socially, culturally, the world has been built on the way of, like, this independent, spread your wings, right, and go. And so you can teach your kids those things and they still might leave.
Mm-hmm.
But that might have brought other opportunities, specifically for the females, in options for good men to marry.
Well, I'm glad that you spread your wings because I got to marry you because you did that. Otherwise, you would still be in Washington.
Like, we are an example of that.
I think I'm going to push back a little bit, though, in the sense of the work of building something is not limited exclusively to how you structure your household and your family. So even if you had a whole bunch of people that all shared the same ideas, which is kind of sounds like what you're describing, about what, you know, a Christian household should look like, and generational passing down of Christianity and its values, unless you're building a place that has gravity as well, then you are going to have people leaving, right? So that's where, particularly as men, one of the responsibilities is, yes, leading your household, but you also have to be building the culture around you, right? And so if you're very just inward focused on the space that you have inside the four walls of your house, I think you're going to end up with what you're describing. And so an interesting question is, how do you create a place that has, and I say gravity, like that means that people aren't needing to go somewhere else to find something else because you've made a space where those things exist. That means jobs. So Christian men are building businesses and places where you can hire all of the people in your church family to continue to work. And then as a result of that, you're drawing in more Christian families. So it's building, it's this growing sort of thing. And then you're bringing the options to you in essence. To me, that seems like the most ideal. So if we're talking about good versus best, right? There's certainly, you can't just give up if that's not what you currently live in, right? But thinking about how do you make that for myself now? Because I would like it if I put enough effort into the community where I plant my roots with my family, such that my kids feel that gravity and they want to stay and they want to take over a business that I've started or that I've bought. And they then include their children in that as well. And then that continues to grow and grow. I don't know. Does that make sense, or how does that resonate or understand with what you were just describing? And feel free to chime in, you guys, as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think my main disagreement with that is the fact that to an extent, kids are going to be kids, and they may not come to that maturity or those convictions because we didn't. I'm over 30, and we are just starting to have these conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Had I had these conversations or figured that out when I was 16, I wouldn't have probably spread my wings and done that. I think they inherently did some of those things, now that I look back and I see that.
And
but
I would agree.
But I didn't recognize that when I was 12.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that problem. I think that's the problem one. Kids are, and you're not going to just throw everything at your kids and expect them to understand it either.
Right.
And you might throw it all at your kids and they do understand it and they're still like, not interested, at least not now. And then again, come being 30, married, and now we have our own place and we're like, oh, well, that was a good realization to come to. a little, maybe not completely, but a little too late, right? Like we've already moved away and done the things. And then I think the second problem to that is gravity doesn't happen overnight. So when you're generation 0 and you do that and you're like, I'm going to put all of this effort into it. Well, the gravity hasn't occurred yet, and it may not even in in our lifetime. So there's not enough gravity to keep our kids here, let's say, hypothetically, if it were this spot we're in right now. Well, then our kids have left. So now we've already lost some gravity, and they're going to go maybe start the same thing somewhere else if they're convicted of the same thing, but later on in life, wherever they land. It's kind of like this spiral that I don't know if it's a solvable problem unless you either recognize it early enough or you know of a place that already has some of that started and then you go there.
Mm-hmm. I think what I'm hearing is the problem is college.
I mean, yeah, that's a big part of it.
There's an argument to be made.
Yeah.
Because, like you're saying, oftentimes we don't understand the things that our parents do until we're in our parents' shoes. And that's a normal part of life. You think, oh, I'll never be that way. And then you grow up and you're like, oh, I understand the struggle. Or you become that, and then you have to work to not be it.
Right.
But we're learning that by the time we're 30.
Correct.
Because we've gone to college, we've fled the house, we've done all these single woman and single man things, and then we're learning the things that our parents were talking about by the time it's already kind of too late. And so if we did what they did 50 or 100 years ago, where you get married at 18, then you start to understand the things and the struggles that your parents went through at 18.
Right.
Which gives you much more time and capacity to
make some of
adjust.
Those bigger decisions. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that needs to also then be coupled with a support structure and community that encourages 18-year-olds to act like adults. Because part of the issue is, and this isn't to say people who get married young, you're doing something wrong, because arguably that is the ideal. But our culture is currently set up that if you're 18, you're still treated like a child by the most of the people around you, because most 18-year-olds act like children. Mm-hmm. And so to take that, juvenile mentality and then throw it into marriage, I think you're in for a lot of challenges that you could potentially be avoided or at least mitigated somewhat if you have the strong family supporting you behind it and you're in a place, right? Geographical, physical location, nearby family and a community that can support you in that.
Yeah, our culture is so upside down. We expect kids not to have tantrums and act like adults, but then we don't expect adults to act like adults. Mm-hmm. And so that makes it just really difficult because we can't, in our society, expect an 18-year-old to be at this space where maybe they should be, maturity-wise. So there's a lot of different problems that we face.
I would say it's very difficult, with the way that society is set up. But because I grew up in a working family also, as Jill was talking about, even the stay-at-home moms still worked, either whether it be on a farm or something, and raised their family well. So I guess do I have a misunderstanding that there is under biblical patriarchy that the woman just does housework?
No, so I think, this is a good distinction to make. And I will clarify my understanding, and you guys can tell me if this lines up with what you're thinking. One of the analogies is, and it's a bit of a provocative one, but just like you wouldn't lend your wife to another man in certain ways, fill in the blanks, a husband wouldn't lend his wife to the state, the government, or another man's business, because she is a part of his household. And so when a wife leaves the home to go work outside the home or for somebody who isn't her husband, then there's a parallel to be drawn there. As an alternative, if she is helping to support the family business, which could include a farm, right, or a family business that is owned, like that would be a different sort of thing. Mm-hmm. You have to manage it such that the household is the primary primary responsibility, and then other things can fill in there. But it has more to do with who has authority over your wife.
I have felt this so much, even in the last 6 months, right, where we're talking about these things and working through our convictions. At work, I've just recognized why it's so hard for women to be in the workplace with a male boss, because we are empathetic. We try to rationalize how people are acting and thinking, and those are all like good things to have a conversation with your husband about, but I shouldn't be making excuses for another man and trying to live almost under his headship for 40 to 50 hours a week. And I've really struggled with that, because I'm like, this is why women need to be in the home under one single man instead of all these other men who are trying to manage us in some ways.
So that's the analogy and the distinction I would draw for the Embers. I don't know. How does that sounds like it kind of resonates for Heidi?
I've thought about this, yeah.
How does that sit for you, Nick?
So I agree totally with what Heidi just said. And me and Heidi both currently are working through that, but not everyone has generational, not wealth, but like richness to their upbringing. It's, I guess, the motives to want to start this, even if you're starting from scratch. This is ground zero. I'm starting with this woman, or I'm starting by myself, even as a single person. I'm going to have this mindset until I meet someone, and building upon that and just being aware of it, even if you do work in the workplace, I think would be a healthy start.
So practically speaking, what are some ways that we are currently working towards biblical patriarchy?
That's a great question. So one of the main things would be trying to start describing what managing a home means. Because I think even just like knowing, when you say patriarchy and housewife, you think of somebody who's wearing a skirt and a head covering, and they're covered in flour and canning all the time. And sometimes it looks that way, and that's fine if that's what you do, or somebody does that, good for them, right? But reframing the idea of what it means to manage a household as a managerial role. And so we've talked about this a little bit too with the oikodespot Jill has mentioned. Thinking about the house as not that the house is a business, right? But some of the same ideas of managing different responsibilities and tasks and finances and all those sorts of things are associated as much with a household as they might be in a business as well. And so having an oikodespot, the housewife, the homemaker, make the home by thinking about those things is I think the first step. So when we talk about different tasks or roles around the house, we put them in the framework of managing, rather than this sort of like servitude maid thing, which is I think what some people would use to describe.
I think as well that it's a lot of like goal setting. So just actually having, I don't know, things that are tangible items that you can say, okay, this could can make it so that in the future, the decisions that we want to make to live in Christian patriarchy more closely, if that means I don't have a job anymore, then right at this point that would mean we'd go from a double income household down to a single income household, and that does make a difference, and it does require some sacrifices, but it also in some scenarios, like you said, it could just be straight up unwise for someone, right? Like
right, if you have a mortgage that requires both of your
yes.
incomes and one of you quits, and then you're going to starve to death and lose your house,
don't do that.
That's
not a
prudent.
Good plan.
Proverbs would have something to say about prudence.
Right. Or you're not gonna make rent, and then you're gonna get evicted from your home. Things like that. Like, it's just not a good decision. And so we've also looked at those things and said, okay, what currently does it look like that I do have an income, and where does that go, and where should we be putting our resources so that if I were not to be in that situation, what would those things look like? And so we have set ourselves goals on both saving, both paying off our mortgage, making sure that we are wise in our decisions on not getting into debt in other ways, because those are just decisions that we can make now and immediately that hopefully do set us up in 5 and 10 years, whatever that is, to move closer to Christian patriarchy, without it just being like, oh, well, that was fun and we're convicted of the thing, but now we're going to lose our house. Like,
Right. And that's why this podcast and podcasts like this, and more importantly, community that lives out these things, is so important, because I've learned so much even from Jill and Dylan, who are 5-ish years ahead of Nick and I, in just thinking things like, oh, when you're taking out a mortgage, only take it out in the husband's or with the husband's income, so that if I would stop working, we could still pay our rent.
Right.
There's so many small things that I didn't think about or wouldn't think about unless I had community and people around us to have us thinking in a certain way and in a certain direction. So even if you don't come to these conclusions today, maybe in 5 years, you might be wondering, okay, what are the things I can do to set myself up for success? And I know that Dylan had mentioned just raising kids and how we can raise our men and women differently, to have different goals and different aspirations, and encourage women to choose jobs that are mostly feminine jobs, like teaching and nursing, things that maybe don't change as fast on a technological level, so that you can take 5-10 years break and get back into it and still use your degree.
Have overlap with what being a homemaker would be. Like, you think like teaching and nursing,
Yeah.
you're going to use those skills probably daily as a mother as well, right?
100%. And so instead of lying to women and telling them that they need to be these career people, encouraging them, yes, go to college, maybe, get a degree, but think about the career that you're going into so that you don't set yourself up for failure when you're 30 and it's too late. And even Nick and I right now are thinking about, like, in 3, 4, who knows how many years, if we have kids, like, am I going to be in a space that I could potentially work from home part-time? And that doesn't mean that women can't help support the household financially. I do agree that in this culture, it's difficult to not have at least a part-time income coming in from the woman. So finding ways to do that where you can prioritize the home.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
I think you've also set yourself up correctly in making those decisions and kind of setting those goals as well, that maybe if you're in this situation of someday being part-time or being able to work remote as well, something to just keep in the back of your mind is, if your household is not the priority, because that should be the first priority of the home manager, the oikodespot, the wife of the household. So if something is, if you're dropping a ball there, it should really be the job first, right? Is really what I'm getting at. So if you set the goal to say, okay, we understand that, but we're going to, set our goals so that we can have our house paid off, or, we're not in debt here and there and have enough savings to be able to do those things. But right now I really need to work part-time, or I need to keep my job, and I can do that remote. So that's great. As long as it doesn't come at the detriment of your home as well.
So there are things women can think about along in singleness and in engagement and in marriage. Each part of your life is going to have a different way that you can prioritize this, and it's not going to look the same for every individual. But then there are also things that men can do too, like they could go to college and work really hard to have a large income and own a home even before you're married, and work for your family business so that you have those advantages. There are things you can do to set your family and your wife up for success too.
Yeah. Owning a business is a big deal. So, like, that's one of the things that Jill and I have been talking about for fun, but also like very seriously of like, what does it mean to, this would also tie into to creating gravity, right? How do you think about creating local businesses that are beneficial to the community, that build Christ's kingdom, right? You are making a Christian business that has the power to influence the politics in your city, for example, right? Because a business owner sitting at a city council meeting is going to have a lot more weight than a homeowner, right? And then now you've got something that you can pass on to your children, and you're providing a stable income, and you're not relying on your wife's income as well. Now, that doesn't happen overnight, especially if you are the generation zero, right, which we've described a little bit. If you're the first one and you have to build this from scratch, that's tougher. But you're working towards, and you have this long-term 5-10 generation mindset that you're making it easier for your son and their son and their son to do what your vision is. And so in combination with having a clear vision of what you want for your descendants, beginning that chain of something. And if it's not a business, it's some sort of something that can maybe help them start a business, right? Everything has to be scaled according to the situation that you find yourself in. But that's never, just because you can't hand your child a house and a business when they're 21 doesn't mean that you shouldn't start building something, right? And build towards that as best you can with the resources that God has given you.
And being the child of a ground zero household is an interesting dynamic too. As my parents, my dad started his own financial planning business, and he's done extraordinarily well for himself. And it just shows how maybe when you get married or when you're young, your life can completely change. My parents were both teachers, both had teacher salaries, and now my dad is doing very, very well. And over time and over having kids, my mom was a full-time teacher and then dropped down to part-time and then ended up staying home with us. So...
And that was enabled because of what your dad was able to build.
Yep. And now there is admittedly some, I don't want to say guilt, but kind of shame that I'm not being the child that's taking that over. And so I understand that there's pressures from kids, right? You don't want to just box them in. But they also did a great job of raising us kids to be like, you can do what you want and it's okay if you don't, but the door is always open. And the encouragement to come back home is so important too, because your kids can leave, but if they know that the door is always open, who knows what will happen in 10 years or with one of my siblings. And so just having a stable household is really, really important.
Mm-hmm.
While it is all and well, and it's really great to have the goals to want to be ground zero or even the second generation and take over a family business, the only way to go about this is not just by being a business owner that passes on a business to your kids. That's not the only right way to do this, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make.
That's one example of assets.
I'm just saying,
right?
we've talked about that a lot, but there are other ways to pass on generational wealth and be good stewards of what we have. And one of those could be encouraging your sons to say, hey, remember, like, you want to go to college? That's great. Like, we would encourage you to do that as parents, but just keep in mind, someday we want you to be able to support a wife and support a family.
And not we want you to, but you instill in them the desire that they want
that
to
they
do
then
that,
want
right?
to do that, and that's a goal. And if that's their goal, then they may look at college or trade school or whatever it is in a different way. Because they'll say, oh, well,
underwater basket weaving.
If I do underwater basket weaving, how am I going to have 2 kids and a wife and a house someday?
Unless your baskets are very, very expensive.
Correct.
I mean, we laugh about that, but that's the majority of people. That's what they don't think ahead like that.
Right.
We're in a society where people do not think forward like that whatsoever. Coming from someone who didn't, until I met Heidi, but I myself, this wish, I'm like, oh, I wish I would have been starting this then and this then, but that wasn't the timing that God had for me.
Right.
So I just want to encourage other Embers, like if you feel that way, it's never too late to start. And it is from ground zero.
So if you are a guy that doesn't own a business right now, or that isn't even a desire of something that you ever had thought you'd want, don't write it off, because that idea might change.
Yes.
But then okay, find something you are maybe skilled in or you enjoy and figure out a way that can support a family and a life someday if you have that, like work towards that desire. Because there are a lot of good, well-paying
Yeah.
jobs out there that will fulfill that role without having to be the owner of the business.
Exactly.
And also still be able to accomplish those goals potentially.
You can be a very successful employee, because what many people forget, coming from a family that owned a business, I mean, you not saying every situation is going to be like this, but like you lose out on your kids' lives. Like you are not going to be there if you're starting from ground zero. So we should set it up as with like the wife takes care of the kids while the husband establishes the business type deal. I might not paraphrasing there, but you want to make sure you have stuff in line, because you're going to miss out on your kids' lives a lot. You got to weigh it out. Like, is it going to be worth it? Depending on what you're doing.
Yeah,
it
that
could
priority of
yes. I'm
why
not
are
saying
you
that's
doing
going to
this?
be that way, but that's a very real thing that a lot of people go through and don't realize it until they're so deep into it and so committed. There's no turning back.
But all this, we're talking a lot about mindset as well. And we're talking about, oh, it's great to get married at 18 when you have nothing, basically. But then it's also great to get married when you're at 30 and you have a lot more set up. If you are young and you're thinking, we would like to get married and we don't have all these things yet, I think it's prudent for the woman to look at the man and be like, well, does he have the will and the desire and the skill set to want these things in the future? And is he working towards that? And if he is, give him a shot, because he might not be there now, but if you see that he will get there in the future, that's important. If you're looking at a man who's playing video games, doing nothing with his life, and you're in love, then you need to really consider that before you lock it down.
Yeah.
When you're
I'm
young.
fortunate that Jill met me when I was headed off to grad school, and if you don't know anything about grad school, you're locking yourself into a life of 5 years of basically below the poverty line salary, with the promise of potentially something good in the future. But Jill married me when I was in that situation, not because she was like looking at the potential of how much money I might make someday,
Right.
but part of it being a mindset towards building something, hopefully, right? And looking at this as somebody who is oriented towards providing for a family, even if he's not immediately doing that now. So there's some, I'm fortunate to have been an exception to my otherwise stated rule
Right.
in a certain circumstance.
Maybe we should get rid of the stigma of a 30-year-old man marrying a, let's say, 22-year-old woman.
Yeah.
Or a 20-year-old, right? Someone that's just out of college versus...
Or not even, right?
Yeah,
Maybe she didn't go to college.
Yeah, but like a 20-year-old to a 30-year-old.
It still makes me really uncomfortable.
I do agree with what Dylan's saying, because that's how it should be, but our society is so backwards and people are so immature at that age when they shouldn't
And
be,
there's
but-
limits on it, right? It's not like it should be a
People are so different,
30-year-old
too.
and a 22-year-old, right? Like, but that sentiment of an older husband isn't the end of the world.
Maybe we also should kind of get rid of like the gold digger idea.
Yes.
Stigma. Like if you like, obviously you don't call it gold digging, but like
Sugar daddy.
Yeah, but a 20, like if
Same
you
thing.
do, you're teaching your daughter to say, okay, does he have these things? Does he have drive, and does he want to build a business? Or does he want to get a degree that is going to pay well and take care of a family? In our society today, some people would call that, well, you're just being a gold digger. You're just trying to find the dude that's going to be a doctor or a surgeon and he's going to make a bunch of money. Well, yes, because that then means I can stay home and have 5 kids and have a home that's going to be well cared for financially by the husband of the household. And then I will stay home and take care of the home in the home management part of the household. But
Certainly.
Right,
The
but-
issue that you run into is that the prevailing attitude, because the idea of a guy needs to be able to have a Lamborghini and a 6-figure salary
right.
before I'd even consider going on a date with him.
correct.
Right.
That's a common thing that you
Yeah.
find in
Yes.
culture today. And then the return question is, oh, okay, what do you bring to the table? And the answer is myself. And that's unacceptable. So if you are a man that is
Yes.
driven and that's building towards that, you look for a woman who doesn't answer myself and look for someone who says, well, I can bring potentially 5 children and a beautiful home that's clean and lovely decorations. that you can come home to after you are done making six figures, right? Like there is an exchange that needs to happen on both sides. Yes, I'm not going to marry off a daughter to a bum.
You are literally trying to look out for things that would point them towards that
Yes.
with shared values, in which case would then hopefully then also imply that he is in fact interested in a wife that's going to take care of the home, and he is doing the things financially. And so it does even out. Of course, culturally, gold digging just mean the Lamborghini and shopping sprees, but
Right.
You also get a lot of not quality men that make a lot of money and have bad
Yes.
plans for the future.
That is
knowing,
not the only qualification.
knowing that they're gonna have whatever they want, because it works both ways.
bad plans for the future, as in none plans for the future.
Well,
Yeah,
their plan
or
is to marry a
plan
hot
A.
wife.
Yeah.
Plan is to marry a hot wife, have her at home, and then do whatever they want on the side because they have enough money. Oh, well, I'm giving you everything you want. I'm gonna do whatever I want, and that happens.
You can ignore the
In and
fact that I
outside
have
the
4
church.
mistresses that aren't you, right?
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah. Exactly.
That's
You could be like, I give you
obviously
so much money. You can't
Right.
say,
And
what do you bring
intent-
to the table? Nothing.
Yeah.
It's a very toxic thing.
But it's so irritating because in this culture that might not be obviously unacceptable. Like we have to say that that's unacceptable,
Yes.
but it is, and it should be obvious.
Yes.
Anyway,
So-
that does
Yeah.
not fall under the umbrella of Christian patriarchy here. That is not what we're trying
Correct.
to describe.
Yeah.
Andrew Tate
Either.
is not somebody, for those who are not familiar, that is not Christian patriarchy, despite the fact that he is very driven and makes a ton of money. He has a bunch of baby mamas and won't marry any of them, and that's not something to aspire towards.
I think Heidi has mentioned it a few times. Being able to not only have the gravity, but attract your kids to come, maybe leave and come back home does usually require 2 parents that are involved and in a stable home. What we've just described are not those things.
Right.
So they would fall outside of the purview of Christian patriarchy.
But what I'm really taking away from all this is that we really need to raise our kids right to where they want these things. I know
Oh,
we talked
yes.
about it, but how much impact we have on our kids. I mean, that might be obvious to some, but it's so important to install these virtues to where kids look up to their parents, be like, oh, like I'm dating a guy, be like, this guy has no attributes of my dad. He doesn't remind me of my dad at all. He has, and then she really dodges a bullet because she was raised by a man that really showed her what she should be looking for when she's older and whatnot. So,
Right. Yes.
yeah.
There you go.
If we have daughters, she'll get to go on a lot of dates with Dad. And if we have sons, I'll get double dates. Dad got to take me out, and he's got to take me out.
Honestly, though,
Your
out to
son,
dinner.
here's your allowance for taking out the trash. Now take your mom to dinner.
Exactly.
I mean, yeah,
Precisely.
he can leave the tip.
Yeah,
IDC has no problem with this.
I don't either.
All right. I don't know. That to me feels like a lot of maybe I'm reading into it. I feel like there's some concrete stuff there though. If you don't feel like there's concrete stuff there, Embers, to like what does it mean to pursue, not just say pursue godly biblical patriarchy, but to pursue godly relationships between men and women, right? And the relationships as God has defined them.
Yeah.
Hopefully there's some helpful things there that if you didn't feel that, then leave a comment and ask a question or,
Yeah.
engage with us because, there's maybe something that's niggling in your mind that you think would be something that you would have liked us to cover here. So
Yeah.
if you engage with us on our various platforms, we would love to have a further conversation and explore because I think you could go a bajillion different directions with this. And again, every situation is going to be different as well. So thank you guys for taking some time to just think about what does it mean? How are we living this way? Are we living this way? How are we trying to move towards living more in line with God's prescription?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Mortal Spirits this time. I'm pretty excited about this one. Thank you guys for putting up with yet another one. It's the last one of this 3-part series, which is not the last one that we're ever going to do, but it's the last of the 3-part series. You may have noticed that the schedule of our releases of episodes was a little bit wonky the past few, and that's because like normal people, we do go on vacation sometimes, and so that interfered a little bit with our editing and release schedule. But one of the vacations that we went on was to Kentucky, and my lovely wife worked very hard to plan a very fun experience in Kentucky. We did the Bourbon Trail and visited a whole bunch of different distilleries. I love bourbon, so it was a really great time. And so over the next few episodes, you'll probably see some different bottles that were acquired there. There was some really lots of fun information and some cool things that we got. But I wanted to start this episode, since coming back, with a new bottle that I got from the trip. So this one is the Larceny.
Ooh.
Larceny, you can see, bottle. Ooh. It is a straight bourbon whiskey. This one was a part of an experience at the Heaven Hill Distillery. So if you're not familiar, I wasn't familiar, I learned this. There's usually like top line name brands, and then they'll have multiple products underneath them. So Jim Beam, for example, is something that probably everybody's heard of Jim Beam.
Mm-hmm.
But they make normal Jim Beam branded whiskey. They also make Knob Creek and Basil Hayden and a few other products as well, Booker's, etc. So if you see that, it might be a Jim Beam product, but it's going to be labeled something else. This is a Heaven Hill product. You can get Heaven Hill branded whiskey, but if you get Larceny, it's coming from Heaven Hill as well. Cool. This one in particular was a part of a really fun experience where we got to taste 4 different whiskeys and then pick the one that we liked the best and then bottle it ourselves. So this bottle, I got it empty and I filled it up under the thing and I put the label on, and so got my name Dylan there on it and the date. This is also a special version that you can only get at the distillery if you do this particular tasting and bottling experience. You will never be able to buy this in a store anywhere else. It's pretty high proof, so hooray for gagging. It's 126.6 proof. And the way that it was described to me when I was tasting it for the first time, and I concur, is a butterscotch bomb. So you get lots of butterscotch nose and palate things. So we'll go ahead.
I still probably won't
give it a sniff.
but
Yeah, I assume you won't.
Smells good.
But the other one I'll say, the glass that I'm sipping out of is from another one of the experiences we did. We went to Pursuit Spirits. They have a podcast as well. That was a really good time. At some point, I will bring one of the bottles from there. But
we have a couple of the Jim Beam ones.
Yes, we do. Okay.
All right.
yep,
Cheers.
give it a smell. Cheers.
Butterscotch for sure.
Butterscotch is what you're tasting for, everybody.
Yeah, it's not. Wait, did you
I kind of like it.
did you drink all of it?
I did.
Oh,
almost all of it.
I only gave you a little bit because I thought you would hate it.
No, I'm glad you only gave me a little.
But you like it?
It burned all the way down.
Yes, it's pretty warm
oh.
if you're not accustomed to it. But aside from the burning and the face you're making,
It's really not that bad.
really, can you explain to me why this is so different
I'm not
of an
a fan.
experience for you? The butterscotch, did I prime your brain to think butterscotch and that helped?
It did,
Okay.
I think. Also, it has a nice, gives me a nice little tingly feeling.
As she
I don't know if everything.
struggles to say words.
Jill, do you concur?
Yeah, I mean, I'm warm and tingly, I guess.
Okay. But your face tells me that you didn't like it.
No.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm.
Oh, it's kind of sweet.
Yeah, it's very sweet.
I don't know if I'm really even a butterscotch fan to start with. So then, in addition to butterscotch bourbon, bad combo.
Yeah. So one thing I will say, this is interesting, and this might be helpful information for the Embers and for you who are enjoying it.
Yeah.
This is what they call a wheated bourbon. So I have not brought one of those yet. In the past, I've described mash bill. You guys are familiar, right? So if it's bourbon, it has to be at least 51% corn. And then usually the remainder of that is rye. So it's 51 plus, so usually it's 60 to 80% corn. And then the remainder of that is rye and 5% of malted barley. In this one, however, they don't use any rye. It's all wheat. So it's corn, wheat, and barley. And oftentimes what you get is I think it's a rounder, sweeter kind of feel to it, because rye oftentimes is going to be spicier, like your cloves and cinnamon and those sorts of things. I learned on this trip that I really like wheated bourbons. At some point I'll bring Maker's Mark. They also do an exclusively wheated bourbon, and so maybe you'll find that you like that one more as well. So that could be a part of it. So if Heidi is looking to enjoy bourbon, a wheated bourbon might be the way to go for you.
It does taste more like bread.
Okay,
Yeah.
there you go.
I don't
agree?
mean, after my bread making experience, I don't know if I think it tasted like the bread I made, so no.
Yes, for the Embers, Jill made a loaf of bread.
It was really
It
good.
tasted pretty good.
Yeah.
I want her to make another one. I told her to make one with jalapenos and cheese,
Yeah.
which means that Heidi
Sorry, you
can't
can't
eat
have
it and
it.
Jill won't eat it.
No, you have to be sorry. I'm just like sweet.
So she's
I
making
love
the loaf of bread for me. Is really what's
100%.
happening.
No one else is going to eat it.
Yeah. Jalapeno cheddar knocks out Heidi.
Nick
Nick already can't eat the bread.
Well, sounds delicious.
And I don't like spicy things, so
Yeah.
Dylan's just gonna have a loaf of bread to himself.
Just make 2 loaves. Make one for me and one for you. Anyway,
All right.
thanks for tasting with me, you guys. That was the Larceny. This is a barrel proof, distillery exclusive single barrel experience. So thanks for joining.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Embers, for spending your time and getting all the way through this 3-part series with us. I am generally pretty happy with how we landed the plane on this. I feel like there's some hopefully concrete takeaways. Hopefully you felt that way. Please let us know in the comments what you thought.
Yeah, if you're hearing this, that means you found us on one platform. We are on many: Spotify, iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts. Drop us a like or a review. It's super helpful. If you want to leave us a comment, then maybe you've got a topic recommendation.
For sure. Or a Q&A. Because we
Yeah.
would love to do a Q&A at some point to address some more specific scenarios, because a lot of what we talk about is pretty broad strokes, which doesn't always apply to one person or another.
Yeah, for
So we're also on shorter form content, so you can leave your comments and questions there as well.
Yep. Share with your friends, please. We need more ears.
X,
Your
Facebook.
ears are coveted by us. So,
Yeah,
Thou shalt not
X.
covet.
yes.
They still are.
The Lord your God is a jealous God, and this Dylan is jealous for your ears.
X, Facebook, Instagram. We're all on there.
Yep.
And remember, burn bright embers.